I leaned back in my chair, staring at it. My lamp flickered again, plunging the room into darkness for half a second before buzzing back to life. And for some reason, that was the moment I made the decision. Not when I saw the post. Not when it vanished. But right then. Because something about the place felt unfinished. Like whatever had happened there hadn't ended properly. I grabbed a pen and wrote the coordinates on the back of an old receipt before my phone died. Just in case. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't think I needed to. I told myself it was just curiosity. Just a quick look. Just to prove to myself that it was fake. I left at 5:30 in the morning. And by the time I reached the fence, I already knew it wasn't. The road out there didn't feel like it belonged to anything anymore. Route 9 past the county line thinned out into long, empty stretches where the pavement looked older than it should have been, cracked in ways that hadn't been repaired because no one bothered driving here anymore. The GPS signal dropped twice before I got close, forcing me to rely on the coordinates I'd written down. I almost missed the turn. There was no sign, just a narrow break in the brush where gravel replaced asphalt. I drove past it, reversed slowly, and angled the car into the path. The tires sank slightly into the loose ground, and the undercarriage scraped once as I pushed forward. That should have been another moment to stop. It wasn't. The track wound through low trees and scrub for about 100 meters before opening up into a clearing that didn't feel natural. It looked flattened. Like something had been built there and then abandoned without fully disappearing. I parked under a cluster of thin, crooked pines. When I stepped out, the air hit me first. Cold, but not sharply. Damp. There was a faint metallic smell underneath it, like old water or rusted pipes. Subtle enough that I almost convinced myself it was just the morning. I leaned back in my chair, staring at it. My lamp flickered again, plunging the room into darkness for half a second before buzzing back to life. And for some reason, that was the moment I made the decision. Not when I saw the post. Not when it vanished. But right then. Because something about the place felt unfinished. Like whatever had happened there hadn't ended properly. I grabbed a pen and wrote the coordinates on the back of an old receipt before my phone died. Just in case. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't think I needed to. I told myself it was just curiosity. Just a quick look. Just to prove to myself that it was fake. I left at 5:30 in the morning. And by the time I reached the fence, I already knew it wasn't. The road out there didn't feel like it belonged to anything anymore. Route 9 past the county line thinned out into long, empty stretches where the pavement looked older than it should have been, cracked in ways that hadn't been repaired because no one bothered driving here anymore. The GPS signal dropped twice before I got close, forcing me to rely on the coordinates I'd written down. I almost missed the turn. There was no sign, just a narrow break in the brush where gravel replaced asphalt. I drove past it, reversed slowly, and angled the car into the path. The tires sank slightly into the loose ground, and the undercarriage scraped once as I pushed forward. That should have been another moment to stop. It wasn't. The track wound through low trees and scrub for about 100 meters before opening up into a clearing that didn't feel natural. It looked flattened. Like something had been built there and then abandoned without fully disappearing. I parked under a cluster of thin, crooked pines. When I stepped out, the air hit me first. Cold, but not sharply. Damp. There was a faint metallic smell underneath it, like old water or rusted pipes. Subtle enough that I almost convinced myself it was just the morning. Enough that I didn't have to force it. And that bothered me more than anything else so far. Because abandoned places don't just stay open. Not like that. Not for years. I approached slowly, my footsteps muted by the dead grass. Up close, the door looked heavier than I expected. Thick. Reinforced. The kind of thing meant to seal completely. The edges were rusted where the metal met the frame. Which meant it had been open for a while. I stopped just in front of it. The air coming from inside was different. Cooler. Still. And carrying that same faint metallic scent, but stronger now. I glanced back once. At the trees. The broken fence. The empty track I'd driven in on. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out my flashlight and switched it on. The beam cut into the darkness. Concrete steps leading down. No light. No movement. Just a quiet that felt heavier than it should have been. I turned sideways. Slipped through the gap. And the moment I crossed the threshold, the air changed. The temperature dropped the second I stepped inside. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed it immediately. The kind of shift your body registers before your brain does. The air felt sealed. Not stale in the usual way, but contained. Like it had been sitting here undisturbed for years. Behind me, the door scraped softly. I turned instinctively. It had shifted, just slightly. Maybe an inch. Not closing, just settling into a new position. I stood there for a few seconds, watching it, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. I told myself it was pressure. Change in airflow. Physics doing what physics does. Then I turned back. The flashlight beam steadied as I angled it downward. Concrete steps. Narrow. Worn smooth in the center from years of use. A metal handrail ran along the right side, partially detached in places where the bolts had rusted out. I tested the first step. Solid. Then the second. Then I started down. Each footstep sounded wrong. Not loud, just muted. Like the sound wasn't echoing properly. The walls seemed to absorb it instead of reflecting it, and that made it harder to judge distance, harder to place myself in the space. About 15 feet down, the stairs opened into a landing. From there, another short set of steps led into a corridor. I paused at the bottom. Listened. Nothing. Not even the faint outdoor noise I'd expected to bleed through the entrance. It was completely cut off. The silence wasn't empty, it had weight to it. A kind of pressure that made me more aware of my breathing, of the subtle movement of my clothes when I shifted. I stepped into the corridor. The first level looked exactly like you'd expect. Offices. A long hallway stretched ahead, maybe 60 feet, with doors lining both sides. Most were open. A few hung half shut, tilted slightly where the hinges had weakened. The floor was covered in old linoleum, gray-green squares, dulled by time and coated in a thin, even layer of dust. That was the first detail that stood out. The dust was perfect. No footprints. No disturbances. No drag marks. Nothing to suggest that anyone, or anything, had moved through here recently. It was uniform. Untouched. I moved slowly, checking each room as I passed. Standard furniture. Metal desks. Filing cabinets. Rolling chairs tipped over or shoved into corners. Papers fused together by moisture and time into warped, unreadable stacks. One room had a bulletin board still mounted to the wall. A few sheets pinned to it, edges curled, ink faded beyond recognition. Another had a coffee mug sitting on a desk, a dark ring staining the surface beneath it, left behind decades ago and never cleaned. Everything felt paused. Like the people who worked here had left quickly, but not in panic. Just, abruptly. Mid-routine. I kept telling myself that. It helped. A little. At the far end of the hall, I found the stairwell. The door was already open. I stood in front of it for a moment, angling the flashlight inside. More stairs. Leading down. The air coming from below felt different. Not colder. Heavier. I held my hand near the opening and felt a faint movement, not quite a draft, more like a slow shift in pressure. Like something deeper inside the structure was breathing. That thought came uninvited. I ignored it. I glanced back down the hallway. Everything behind me remained exactly as it had been. Still. Silent. Undisturbed. No sign that I'd been followed. No sign that anyone else had ever been here. And yet. The post. The messages. The coordinates. Someone had come down here. Recently. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. Stepped through the doorway. And started down to the next level. The second level wasn't like the first. Same materials. Same concrete walls and institutional layout, but the purpose had changed. You could feel it before you fully processed it. This wasn't where people worked. This was where they stayed. The stairwell opened into a long room lined with metal bed frames. Most of the mattresses were gone or collapsed into dark, unrecognizable shapes. A row of lockers stood along one wall, some open, some still shut. I moved slowly through the space. The dust here wasn't as perfect as above. Still thick. Still old. But disturbed in places, subtle breaks in the surface that didn't match the uniform decay of everything else. Not fresh, but not untouched either. That was enough to put me on edge. I checked the lockers as I passed. Empty. Mostly. One still had something inside, a single boot. Military issue by the look of it. The leather had stiffened, cracked along the folds. The laces were snapped. I didn't touch it. At the far end of the room, a doorway led into what looked like a storage area. Shelving units had collapsed under their own weight. Wooden crates had split open, spilling contents that had long since degraded into dust and fragments. And above another door. A sign. Lower complex access, authorized personnel only. The lettering was faded, but readable. That door was locked. I tried the handle anyway. Solid. No movement. To the right, recessed slightly into the wall, was an elevator shaft. The doors were sealed tight, a thin seam running down the middle. I wedged my fingers into the gap and pulled. Nothing. It hadn't been used in years. Which left one option. The stairwell. It was tucked just beside the elevator, almost easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. The door opened without resistance, swinging inward with a soft, dry creak. I didn't step through right away. I angled the flashlight down. The beam stretched into darkness, catching the edges of concrete steps that descended in a straight line, no turns, no landings, just a narrow drop into a lower level the light couldn't fully reach. I counted the visible steps. Then stopped. The air coming up from below felt wrong. Not colder. Not warmer. Just, denser. Like the space itself had weight. I stood there, listening. At first, nothing. Then. A faint sound. So subtle I almost missed it. Not mechanical. Not environmental. Organic. A low, uneven vibration, like something shifting far below the threshold of clear hearing. It didn't echo the way sound should in a concrete stairwell. It felt absorbed, contained. I swallowed, adjusted my grip on the flashlight, and stepped inside. The stairwell was narrower than the others. My shoulders brushed closer to the walls. The ceiling dipped partway down, forcing me to lower my head slightly. The space felt tighter, more confined with every step. And the sound. It didn't get louder. It got clearer. Not in volume. In texture. About halfway down, I stopped. Something on the steps caught the light. The dust pattern. It wasn't even. The center of each step had less buildup. Along the edges, there were faint smudges, repeated contact points where something had brushed the walls while moving. If you are new on my channel The Silent Screams, please donate me in the form of subscribe. I crouched slightly, lowering the beam. A footprint. Partial. Boot tread. Not mine. Fresh enough that the edges hadn't fully softened into the surrounding dust. Someone had come down here. Recently. The realization settled in slow and heavy. The post. The missing friend. This wasn't abandoned. Not completely. I straightened slowly, listening harder now. The sound came again. Closer. Still faint. Still wrong. I kept going. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a corridor. Longer than anything above. The ceiling was lower, maybe 7 feet, and lined with thicker conduit bundled along the left side. The walls were painted a dull green, peeling in places where moisture had seeped through. The floor wasn't clean. A path ran down the center. Not footprints. Not exactly. More like displacement. As if something had moved through here repeatedly, pushing the dust aside without leaving clear impressions. I stepped carefully along the edge, keeping my distance from the disturbed section. Then I saw the marks on the wall. Scratches. Horizontal. Irregular. At about shoulder height. I reached out and touched one. Dry. Old. But not ancient. And as I pulled my hand back, the flashlight shifted. Catching something further ahead. A dark smear on the wall. I moved closer. At first, I thought it was rust. The place had enough corrosion for that to make sense. But the color was wrong. Too deep. Too uneven. I lifted my hand and pressed 2 fingers lightly against the edge of it. Dry. Flaking. When I pulled back, the residue on my skin was dark red. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have. Then wiped it off on my jeans. Blood. Old. But not old enough. I didn't stop moving after that. Because somewhere ahead. The sound came again. And this time. I was certain it wasn't the building. The corridor didn't turn. It stretched straight ahead, long enough that the beam of my flashlight seemed to shorten the distance instead of reveal it. The air pressed in closer the further I went, thick enough that every breath felt slightly delayed, like I was pulling it through something. The sound came again. 3 seconds. Pause. Then again. It wasn't random. It had a pattern. And now that I was closer, I could hear something under it, a second layer. Wet. Shifting. Like breath being forced through something that wasn't meant to carry it. I slowed down. Not by choice. My body just did it. The marks on the walls grew more frequent. Scratches. Deeper now. Some cutting past the paint into the concrete beneath. Not clean lines, uneven, jagged, like multiple points of contact dragging at once. Whatever made them hadn't been smooth. The path along the floor changed too. It split. 2 channels now, running parallel down the center of the corridor. The dust pushed aside more aggressively, leaving shallow grooves that stretched forward into the dark. Drag marks. Something heavy had been moved through here. More than once. I crouched briefly, angling the light along the grooves. The edges were irregular, disturbed in layers. Not fresh, but not settled either. I stood again quickly. The sound came back. Closer. I followed the corridor another 20 feet before it opened. The space widened abruptly into a larger room, a junction. The ceiling rose higher here, maybe 12 feet, and 3 additional corridors branched off from the far side and the left. I stopped at the threshold. My flashlight swept across the room. And caught something that didn't belong. At first, my brain tried to file it under debris. Insulation. Wiring. Collapsed material from the ceiling. But it didn't match. Because it was, stretched. Suspended. Pulled tight between the walls and ceiling in thick, fibrous strands that caught the light in a way that made them seem almost, alive. Red. Not paint. Not rust. A deep, organic red that darkened toward the edges. The strands varied in thickness. Some as wide as my fingers, others thin and almost translucent. They layered over each other in a dense structure that occupied nearly half the room. Anchored. Deliberate. My grip tightened on the flashlight. I took one slow step forward. Nothing moved. No reaction. The strands remained still, taut where they connected to the wall, the conduit rack, the ceiling. I shifted my angle slightly. And saw him. At first, it didn't register as a person. Just a shape within the structure. Something caught in the web of strands, suspended off the ground. Then the details aligned. A man. Wrapped. Held in place by the same red fibers, which looped around his torso, under his arms, across his legs. Not random. Structured. Like the webbing had been placed with intent. His head tilted to one side. Face partially obscured. Clothes still visible, a dark jacket, jeans, one boot. He moved. Small at first. A twitch in the shoulder. Then another in the hands. Rapid, irregular movements that didn't match breathing or conscious control. But his chest. It was rising. Falling. Alive. The sound. It was coming from him. I stepped closer without thinking. My light fixed on his face. His eyes were open. And they were tracking me. Not turning, just moving within their sockets, following as I shifted position. Slow. Delayed. His mouth opened slightly. The movement looked difficult. Strained. Like pushing through resistance. The sound changed. It wasn't just a groan anymore. It had shape now. Almost words. I felt something cold settle in my chest. He was trying to speak. I took another step. And the webbing trembled. Not violently. Just a subtle shift in tension that moved through multiple strands at once, radiating outward toward the upper part of the structure. The man's movements changed instantly. More intense. Less controlled. His mouth opened wider. The sound sharpened. Then. The noise hit. A sharp, tearing screech that filled the room without direction. It didn't echo. It just existed, everywhere at once. I froze. And in that half-second, something moved above me. Fast. Too fast to track. The webbing shuddered hard this time, reacting to weight. Something had dropped onto it. And before I could even process that, it shifted. Orienting. Toward me. I raised the gun without thinking. The flashlight beam caught it. Just enough to understand that what I was looking at was not human. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. My brain tried to force it into something familiar, an animal, a person, anything that made sense, but it didn't hold. The proportions were wrong. The structure was wrong. It clung to the webbing like it belonged there. 6 limbs. Maybe more, I couldn't be sure because they didn't stay still long enough to count properly. They were long and jointed twice, bending at angles that didn't match anything human. Each limb ended in narrow points that sank slightly into the red strands, anchoring it without effort. Its body was the worst part. Not because it was large, though it was, easily 4 feet across, but because it wasn't symmetrical. One side bulged more than the other, stretched tight like something inside it didn't sit evenly. And the head. It wasn't where it should have been. It hung beneath the body. Attached to the underside like it had been placed there instead of grown. The face was human. Or had been. Skin pulled too tight in some places, too loose in others, like it had been reshaped without care for how it should fit. The mouth moved constantly, small, repetitive motions, and the eyes. The eyes weren't aligned. They shifted independently, sliding in different directions before both locking onto me at the same time. The murmur I'd been hearing. That came from it. Layered beneath a deeper, wet clicking sound, like the mouth was working too fast, too much. It adjusted its position. 2 limbs lifted. Reset. Gripped again. The webbing trembled under its weight. The man suspended in the strands convulsed sharply in response, his body jerking as if the movement above him was connected somehow, like tension in the web translated directly into him. I didn't move. I couldn't. The creature stilled. Completely. Except for the mouth. Except for the eyes. 3 seconds. Maybe 5. Time stretched in a way that didn't feel real. Then it moved. Not forward. Not in a straight line. It used everything at once. 2 limbs on the wall. 1 on the ceiling. Others still gripping the web. It shifted across multiple surfaces in a way that broke any sense of direction, like it wasn't bound to a single plane. I fired. The first shot hit something, I think, but I couldn't tell what. The sound inside the room was overwhelming, the echo not bouncing back cleanly but stacking, pressing into my ears. I fired again. The creature didn't react the way anything should. No recoil. No hesitation. Just movement. Faster now. I stepped back, trying to create distance, and my heel hit something slick. My foot slipped. For a split second, I lost balance, caught myself against the wall, fingers scraping concrete, and that was enough for it to close the gap. Not completely. But enough. It dropped from the webbing. Hit the floor wrong, one limb folding under its weight before snapping back into position with a sharp, wet sound, and that was the only moment it seemed, imperfect. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. The corridor swallowed me instantly. The flashlight beam bounced wildly with each step, cutting through the dark in broken flashes. Every time I glanced back, the light ahead vanished for a second, leaving me running blind. Behind me. The sound. Limbs striking concrete. Scraping. Fast. Too fast. And underneath it. That voice. The murmur had changed. Louder now. Rhythmic. Almost structured. Like it was trying to form something I could understand. I hit a side corridor without thinking. Just reacted. Turned hard and kept moving. If you are new on my channel The Silent Screams, please donate me in the form of subscribe. The passage was narrower, shorter, ending in a T-junction that I didn't recognize at all. My sense of direction fractured completely. I had no idea where I was in relation to the entrance anymore. The flashlight flickered. Once. Twice. Then strobed. Complete darkness between each pulse. And in those gaps. The sound was closer. I didn't wait for the light to stabilize. I took the left passage and ran. The corridor curved slightly, then opened. And I recognized it. The conduit along the ceiling. The layout. This was the main corridor. Or close enough. I pushed harder. Behind me, the sound changed again. Not just movement now. The clicking grew sharper. Faster. And the murmur. It wasn't just noise anymore. It almost sounded like words. I didn't listen long enough to understand them. Because ahead. The stairwell door came into view. And I didn't slow down. I hit the stairwell door with my shoulder hard enough that it slammed open against the wall. The impact shot pain down my arm, but I barely registered it. Momentum carried me forward, and I took the first steps 2 at a time, one hand dragging along the rail just to keep myself upright. The flashlight beam bounced wildly. Concrete. Steps. Wall. Darkness. Behind me. The sound didn't fade. That was the worst part. It should have. Distance should have stretched it, softened it, turned it into something distant and less immediate. But it didn't. It stayed close. Too close. The scraping of limbs against concrete echoed up the stairwell in uneven bursts, mixed with that wet, rhythmic clicking. And underneath it. The voice. Closer now. Clearer. Not just random shapes of sound anymore. It had cadence. Like something repeating. Trying to lock into language. I pushed harder. Halfway up, my foot caught the edge of a step. I stumbled forward, my knee slamming into the concrete hard enough to knock the breath out of me. Pain flared sharp and immediate, but I grabbed the railing, forced myself up, and kept moving. Stopping wasn't an option. Not here. Not with that sound getting closer. I reached the top of the stairwell and burst back onto the second level. The barracks. The rows of empty frames. The locker with the single boot. All of it flashed past in fragments as I ran. The building didn't feel empty anymore. That stillness I'd noticed before. It was gone. Or maybe I just couldn't feel it over everything else. The floor vibrated faintly under my feet. Not shaking. Not enough to see. But enough to feel through my steps. Like something below was moving with weight. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound told me everything. I hit the next stairwell, took it fast, nearly slipping again but catching myself before I went down. Up. Up. Every step felt longer than it should have been. The air shifted as I climbed. Less dense. Less heavy. But the sound. It followed. Muted slightly now, but still there. Still wrong. I burst onto the first level. The office corridor stretched ahead, exactly as I'd left it. Dust. Doors. Silence. No. Not silence. The echo of my own movement filled it now, loud and uncontrolled. I ran straight through it. Past the rooms I'd checked. Past the desks and broken chairs. Everything that had felt ordinary before now looked staged. Like it had been left that way on purpose. I didn't slow. The final stairwell came into view. The one leading up to the entrance. Light. Faint, gray morning light bleeding down from above. I took the steps 3 at a time, my hands sliding along the wall for balance. The door at the top. Still open. Still waiting. I pushed through it and stumbled out into the open air. The shift hit instantly. Sound returned. Wind in the grass. Distant birds. The faint hum of the road miles away. All of it rushed back in at once, overwhelming after the contained silence below. I moved 10 feet away from the entrance before stopping. Turning. The bunker door sat behind me. Slightly more open than before. Dark inside. Still. No movement. No sound. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to listen past the noise in my own head. Nothing came out. Whatever had followed me. It hadn't crossed the threshold. Or it didn't need to. That thought hit harder than anything else so far. I backed away slowly at first. Then turned and walked faster. Then faster. Until I was through the cut in the fence and back at my car. My hands were shaking when I opened the door. Worse when I sat down. I set the gun on the passenger seat and just sat there for a moment, trying to slow my breathing, trying to convince myself that I was out. That it was over. Eventually, I started the engine. Pulled away. And I didn't look back. Not once. Because something about that place. It didn't feel like it had let me go. It felt like I had just managed to leave. And those aren't the same thing. I got home just before 9 a.m. The drive is a blur now. I remember traffic lights. A gas station I didn't stop at. The way my hands wouldn't stop shaking on the steering wheel no matter how tightly I gripped it. But nothing followed me. At least, nothing I could see. My apartment looked exactly the same as I'd left it. Door locked. Windows shut. Everything in place. Normal. I remember thinking how strange that felt, like the world outside that bunker hadn't changed at all. Like I'd stepped out of something that shouldn't exist and landed back into something that refused to acknowledge it. I dropped my bag by the door. Set the gun on the kitchen counter. Walked straight to the sink and just stood there for a while, staring at nothing, trying to slow my breathing down to something close to normal. Eventually, I showered. Hot water. Long enough that the mirror fogged completely. I kept telling myself it was over. That whatever I'd seen down there stayed down there. That things like that don't just follow you home. Afterward, I made coffee. Didn't drink it. Just sat at my desk, staring at the same place I'd been sitting the night before when I saw the post. The post that didn't exist anymore. I tried to piece it together. The man in the web. The thing on the ceiling. The sounds. The way the layout didn't match the plans. It all felt fragmented already, like my brain was trying to smooth it into something more manageable. That's what memory does. It cleans things up. Makes them less sharp. Less impossible. I was halfway through convincing myself it had some kind of explanation, something biological, something real, when I noticed it. On my sleeve. Near the cuff of my jacket. A thin strand. Dark red. I froze. It was maybe 4 inches long, stuck lightly to the fabric. I must have brushed against the webbing without realizing it. That was the only explanation. Slowly, I reached up and pinched it between my fingers. It felt wrong. Not dry. Not fully solid either. Slightly tacky. I pulled. It stretched. Farther than it should have. The strand thinned as it extended, becoming almost translucent at its limit. I kept pulling, waiting for it to snap. It didn't. Not until I'd drawn it out nearly a foot from where it clung to the fabric. Then it broke. The loose end curled slightly before going still. I stared at it for a long time. Then I stood up, took off the jacket, and sealed it inside a garbage bag. I left it outside my apartment door. I didn't want it inside. I didn't want to think about what it might still be. I sent an email after that. To a federal land management office I found online. I wrote everything down, coordinates, descriptions, what I saw. I don't know if anyone read it. I don't know if it mattered. By noon, exhaustion hit hard enough that I couldn't fight it anymore. I lay down. And I slept. No dreams. Just darkness. I woke up a little after 10 p.m. The room was quiet. Normal. The hum of the refrigerator. Faint traffic outside. Someone's TV in another apartment. I lay there for a minute, letting my head clear. Then. A sound. Faint. From somewhere deeper in the apartment. Wet. Uneven. 3 seconds. Pause. Then again. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just listened. It came a third time. And underneath it. That second layer. A murmur. Familiar. Too familiar. My chest tightened as recognition settled in. Slowly, I sat up. Reached for the gun on the nightstand. The sound came again. Closer. From the direction of the kitchen. Or maybe the bathroom. Hard to tell. I stood. Stepped into the hallway. The darkness at the far end felt heavier than it should have been. The air felt thicker. Like it had in the stairwell. Another sound. Closer now. And this time. I heard it clearly. Not just noise. Not just rhythm. Something forming. Trying to become words. I raised the gun slightly. Took one step forward. Then another. And as I reached the edge of the hallway, something moved in the dark. Fast. Just out of sight. Followed by that same soft, stretching sound. Like something pulling itself free. I stopped. Every instinct telling me not to go further. The sound came again. Right in front of me now. And underneath it. The voice finally broke through. Not clear. Not fully human. But close enough. Close enough that I understood it. 3 words. Repeated. Over. And over. And over. Still inside. If you are new on my channel The Silent Screams, please donate me in the form of subscribe.